guys, welcome to Cows to Glory Guide. Right now we're going to take a video of why the crawling helps my brain.
Yes, so this is real life. There are kids riding bikes in the background and stuff. You're going to hear them. But anyway, if you haven't followed along, I'm Sarah. I'm married to Mark, who is behind the camera, and we have a total of 8 children at home, 10 children in total, and this is our youngest. He's 17 weeks old tomorrow, and our oldest at home is 17 years old. And this video is about Josiah.
Who's 12?
What is your diagnosis? Why do we need to crawl? What do you have?
I have cerebral palsy and seizures.
Yes, very good. Okay, so he has cerebral palsy and epilepsy, and we have many videos on the channel, but a quick background to this is when he was born, we had no idea that he had any issues. There was never a time within, some people think cerebral palsy comes during long labors, which it can, but there was never a time during the labor where anything looked wrong. And when he was born, the only issue that we had where we thought that there was any problem was he was a very sleepy baby and had a hard time nursing, and he fell asleep often. But he was also just short of 37 weeks gestation, so he was considered a late-term preemie, and late-term preemies can just be sleepy. And also, you can be here, we're just gonna take a video, okay? You can be... Gideon gets upset because everyone's faster than him. He's 3, almost 3. So anyway, so we didn't know that there was actually a problem. We actually found out later also, like when he was 3 or 4, that Josiah had a tongue tie that we didn't know about. So that could have been part of the eating problem. But other than that, we never had a issue with Josiah. We never saw anything might be wrong until he was about 9 months old. At that point, he, is wanting to reach for toys and kind of be interactive with people. He had not at this point really crawled. He was rolling like babies should, but he, we found out later, was only rolling one direction. So he could roll back to front to back on that same side, but not the other way. But hindsight is 20/20. So anyway, the baby before Josiah was Samuel, and Samuel was just a kid who liked to sit and watch the world go by. He was a very chunky little baby and had no interest in learning to crawl, no interest in learning to walk. And so my next experience of a baby who just wants to sit and watch the world go by, I wasn't really worried, because by this point Samuel was up to normal on all his developmental milestones. So anyway, all of that to say, at about 9 months old, we realized that when he would reach for a toy, he would only reach with his right hand, and his left hand stayed clenched fist. He could move that arm, but he wouldn't use the hand. And so I called the doctor and said, something's wrong. I think we need to get checked out. The doctor agreed something was wrong, sent us to the neurologist. The neurologist did an ultrasound of Josiah's head. There was still a soft spot here at that time because he was only 9 months old. So they did an ultrasound and saw that he had no growths. And so at that point we got a working diagnosis of cerebral palsy, and we didn't get an official diagnosis till he was 4 because he started having seizures. Seizures and CP are related, but not necessarily all the time. And so at that point, when we had the ultrasound at 9 months, the next thing to do was the sedated MRI. But all we were going to do with whatever we found out from that was therapy. So the doctor was okay with our conservative approach to just do therapy and just work with the idea that he might have cerebral palsy. When I might say cerebral, I might say cerebral. People say it both ways. So if you hear someone say it, they're talking about the same thing. So cerebral palsy is, at some point, the brain was lacking oxygen. When they did that MRI, they found out that he had a stroke in utero, or shortly after he was born. However they determined this, I don't understand the science behind it, but he had a stroke sometime between 28 weeks gestation and 28 days after birth. But because we'd had other children at this point and the severity of the brain damage, the doctors feel that I would have seen something of symptoms had it been after he was born. So all of that to say, there was nothing we could have done differently. We don't know why this happened, and it's not something that's going to happen with our other children. This is kind of a one-up. This isn't a genetic thing. Anyway, back to when we found out we started therapy with him, and we had friends who are missionaries in Cambodia. They are currently in the States, but they work with a center in Cambodia that they started for kids with brain injuries. And when he was almost 2, she evaluated him using the theory that they use over there, the concept they use over there. And she told me what was going on with him and what we needed to work on. So she had learned all that she knew through the Family Hope Center, which is in Norristown, Pennsylvania. This is an ad for them. I'm not getting paid by them. I just wanted you to know what we have used. So she told me all of this stuff that we could do. And at the time, we could not afford the program or afford to go down to Pennsylvania to get treatment. But she told me things I could work on at home. And we did some of those things, and some things got better, some things didn't. And I didn't use the program to its full extent because I didn't fully understand the program. But anyway, then come 2020, we look back into it because if everyone remembers, the government gave that money that came out of nowhere and whatever. And so we were like, we want to do things that will better our children with that money. We don't want to just go buy big screen TVs and that type of stuff. So we looked back at the program, and because of COVID, they had started doing a lot more online. These people also work with people all over the world now, and so they can do their evaluations online and everything. So we looked, if you're interested in this, I'll try to put a link in the description, but the Family Hope Center has I think it's 3 free classes that you can watch to see if it's even anything that you're interested in. It talks about how the brain develops. When COVID happened, we decided to spend the money on the larger class, which at the time was $500. I don't know how much it is, but it's like 30 hours of teaching, and you get 2 phone consults with the doctors. They help you figure out how to evaluate your child and see where you need to work. And I found that class to be very, very educational. And I think if you were working with a child that wasn't as unique as Josiah, whose brain injury was not as big as Josiah, that you could figure out a lot of the therapy on your own from that $500 class. Like, I think that that is a very good investment if you have a child who has brain injury. And when I say brain injury, anything that affects the brain. So like Down syndrome is not necessarily a brain injury, but the brain is having trouble developing the way that God has made it to develop. And so they teach you ways to get back to that. And I'll get to that in a minute. Also for Josiah, because we were still trying to figure out how to stop the seizures, we paid the other money to go for an actual evaluation at the center. So we had an entire day where they evaluated him, asking me questions. So anyway, we spent the money to go for the evaluation down there, which was great. It was 2 days. They did an entire day of learning about him, having him do it, like watching him crawl, watching him do different tasks, figuring out if he was right-brained, left-brained, right-eyed, left-eyed, that type of thing. And then the next day they gave us therapies to do, and they walked us through all the steps. So if you have a child who's very unique in what they need, it might be worth it for your family to do that. I'm glad we did it and we were able to try some of the things. It did not work for Josiah, but I'm glad we were able to use their techniques to see if it would help Josiah. Like, one of the things they do is a special diet that did not help Josiah, but it still was nice to be able to say, okay, we've tried that and it doesn't work. Okay, so the one thing that we found very useful from the evaluation, but you would have found this on the first class I talked about that was $500, is the crawling aspect. And so we had someone ask us how the crawling helps his brain. So basically, this program believes that you were created in a way where your development should take certain steps and you should develop one skill before moving on to the next skill. And how our culture works, our children don't always go through all those steps. Sometimes it's because of the way that we don't carry our children or lay them down on the floor a lot, and I'll explain that in a second. But also, if your child has a brain injury, the brain might not go through the right steps and you need to go back and teach that. So when a baby is in utero, there are certain muscle skills that they are using while being in your amniotic fluid, and certain muscles and stuff that develop during that time. And so this program goes and evaluates the child in 7 different areas. which includes communication, it includes social skills, it includes motor skills. And they evaluate to see what stage your child stopped at. So they want to know what is your child capable of doing and what point did they stop that development. But the thing that Josiah missed was like where he stopped developing, he never army crawled. And that's a very important skill set for children to army crawl. So a lot of people are delaying their kids without even knowing it by putting the child in containers, they call them. So whether the child goes from the car seat to the crib to the bouncer to the stander to the walker, those types of things. A lot of times we're just moving our child from one area to another, the swing, to keep them happy while we're getting stuff done around the house. But children need a lot of sensory input, which some of that can be done in a carrier or carrying them in your arms because they're learning trunk support and that type of thing. But also having belly time and having just maybe laying on their back, but laying down in a flat position, to be able to move their arms, to be able to move their legs, to be able to realize that if they push, they're moving forward. Okay, so one thing that we do to our kids unknowingly that causes some of this delay is we swaddle them. And when a baby's swaddled, especially if they're swaddled a lot of the day, they don't have the ability to move their arms, to push off like they're supposed to. And all of those are really good for brain development. So Josiah never crawled, army crawling. So on your belly, hands in, like, can you lay on the ground and show them? I'll talk about it for a second while you get down there. So army crawling, when
the grass.
Yep, when you're on your belly and you're doing this to like you're actually learning to track with your eyes, which is how you learn to read, going across the page like that. And so it's very important that they do bilateral work, so putting up their left hand and pushing off with their right foot and actually getting their big toe to push them forward. He cannot crawl right now because he broke his arm, and so he can't actually do the motion. He can get down on the ground, but he can't actually push with it. So when you're doing that, it helps with the tracking. But also for Josiah, he's old enough now that he's told us that it takes away his headaches, right?
Yeah.
What does crawling do?
It takes my headaches. And it helps me, like, I can run faster or something.
Yeah? You think you can run faster and stuff after you've done it?
Yeah.
I would say also, him crawling, he has developed muscle in this left side that's affected. His scapula, his arm bones used to be much smaller, much weaker, and the crawling has incredibly strengthened his overall stature.
Yes.
And his strength and his endurance.
Also, with his seizures started out as focal seizures, which doesn't mean they affect the eyes. I thought for the longest time it meant that, but focal means it's in one part of the brain. But he would look over to the side. He would look like he was just a disobedient kid that didn't want to look at you. So when he starts to get seizury, he can start doing that. His eyes will start going off. He'll try to have a conversation and his eyes go off. And if we say, hey, let's get down and crawl, he can then come back and his eyes aren't doing that anymore. It actually stops the seizure activity in his brain. So then the next step that he didn't do, we really need to focus on the crawling with him because his body didn't do that. But as he develops, creeping is the next thing. So that's when you're on your hands and knees. What you think of as crawling for a baby is actually called creeping. And when you do that, that actually shows you, I've got flour on me, actually shows you depth perception, because when your hands are on the floor and you're crawling, you're seeing your hand a certain distance from you, and it's helping your body to make those connections of like distance. So on your hands and knees, on your belly is for tracking, and this one's for depth perception. And a lot of kids who never crawled have trouble being in your face when they're talking to you, because the social bubble, or whatever you want to call it, is about an arm's length from your body. And so people who never crawled didn't have that input into their brain that they should stand back from people. So the ones that are always up in your face and don't know how to talk to you may have missed that crawling step. Both of these cause the sides of the brain to work together, because you're doing left arm, right leg, right arm, left leg, and it's making the paths between the two sides talk to each other, which helps with a lot of things, from just having trouble with like spatial recognition, having trouble with learning to read, having trouble with interpersonal skills. There's a bunch of stuff there. So the crawling is very, very effective. The person who specifically asked about that, I'm just going to mention a couple other things. They also did smell therapy for Josiah, which helps with emotions, the part of your brain that talks, like if you remember something. For me, if I smell palm olive soap, I go back to memories of my grandma's house. There's a lot to do with memories and emotion there, so we had smell therapy. They do certain breathing exercises which help his brain to release carbon dioxide and to bring in more oxygen, because kids with brain injuries have trouble with that. They have us doing certain like learning games with him, because he in a lot of ways has autistic tendencies where he doesn't see the world around him the way the rest of the people do. So they gave us a lot of really, really good therapies, but you would learn a lot of those from that first class the class that I talked about that cost the $500 at the time we took it. I don't know how much it costs right now, but you can see if this would be any interest to your family or something that you think might help your family by watching those 3 free videos that they have that explain to you kind of their thought process on God making our body to develop in a certain way. And if we've missed one of those steps, even if we've gone past it, we need to go back and help our brain to understand. These help your brain organize your thoughts. I probably need to crawl a little bit. Help your brain organize your thoughts, organize the different things that are going on, help you learn to file things correctly. It's just interesting how they teach you about how the brain works. So anyway, we're gonna go inside and finish the other video that we were making. And I hope that this helped. If you have more questions about this, ask, and I can make a follow-up video if people have more questions. We'll talk to you later. Thanks for joining us on Herding Little Cows to the Glory of God.